I have the great pleasure of conducting a hot button session on AI in our very cold studio in Davos. Welcome. Introducing Professor Stuart Russell, who teaches computer science at the University of California, Berkeley. He's also the author of the book called Artificial Intelligence, which is a foundational stone for thousands of universities teaching the course. And he has recently signed an open letter along with Elon Musk to pause the AI development. Also joined with me today is Lauren Woodman, who runs DataKind, a non-profit organization for the last 10 years, working on using data for public good. Welcome.
Thank you.
So first of all, let's start with the open letter that you signed on pausing AI development, right? Can you give us a context on why you signed it? Because you felt that AI had an internal purpose. What does that mean for our viewers out there? Please explain.
So let me wind the clock back a bit to a time before we heard about generative AI and ChatGPT. We were making slow, steady progress on various tasks within artificial intelligence, like visual recognition and self-driving cars and so on. And then the first real generative AI systems hit the market in the middle of 2022, which were actually the image generators. And that seemed like an amazing new thing where you could just describe a picture. You know, I would like to see a picture of an elderly lady diving into an icy lake. And it would just generate that picture, photorealistic cartoon in the style of Van Gogh, whatever you want. And people were really blown away by that. And then ChatGPT came along, which does something similar with language, except that ChatGPT is trained in such a way that it appears to be answering your questions and carrying out your requests. So write me a program that will print out a calendar in Chinese. Write me a 4-stanza poem describing the most recent deliberations of the European Parliament.
Davos.
And it just does an amazing job. And that introduced hundreds of millions of people to AI. Previously, they might have been using AI, but without realizing that the Google search engine has AI underlying it, that their credit card transactions are being reviewed by AI systems. All of that's invisible. This made AI visible, and it woke people up to what the world would be like if general purpose intelligence were on tap. And then in March of 2023, two things happened. First of all, OpenAI announced GPT-4, which was considerably more capable, which did things that surprised its creators. And a week later, Microsoft, which had funded a lot of the development of GPT-4 and had been working with it for several months, published a paper called Sparks of Artificial General Intelligence. And artificial general intelligence is the kind of intelligence that exceeds human capabilities in every dimension. The kind of intelligence that Alan Turing, the founder of computer science, had warned in 1951 we would have to expect the machines to take control. So here is Microsoft, a group of very distinguished researchers saying, we are creating exactly the kind of AI that Alan Turing said would take over the world. And so a number of us, while retaining a certain amount of skepticism about the claims being made by OpenAI and Microsoft, thought that AI was progressing faster than the capabilities of governments to deliberate and regulate in a sensible way, particularly when you look at the types of risks that these systems might present. So the open letter says, could we just hold on, not develop systems more powerful than GPT-4? We're not saying stop AI research. We're not saying stop finding ways to use the technology. We're just saying, if you want to develop systems more powerful than GPT-4, hold off until governments have had a chance to think about it. And the consequence of that letter was actually, I would say, much bigger than we expected. The very next day, UNESCO wrote to all of its member states an emergency letter saying implement in hard regulation the AI principles that all the member states had agreed, and directly referencing the open letter as the cause for this request. We saw OpenAI itself calling for governments to regulate AI. We had emergency meetings in the White House. European Union called for an emergency global summit. And the UK, which had very recently said there was nothing to see here, no need to regulate, pro-innovation, full speed ahead, very soon decided that we needed a global summit on AI safety, which was announced in June and happened at the beginning of November. So it was as if the world suddenly woke up and they saw an email from the aliens saying, we're going to land on your planet. And they said, oh my goodness, what do we do? And that was very encouraging. And I actually felt and continue to feel optimistic that the world is now taking this question seriously.
Okay. Lauren, would you have signed the letter, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think from DataKind's perspective, we're a nonprofit that really is focused on the application of these tools in a social impact setting. I don't know that we would have signed or not signed. We're very much in the world of not taking a position, not to dodge the question, but largely because our focus is somewhere different. I will agree with Stuart, though, wholeheartedly, that I think one of the things that the letter did, and one of the things that the Microsoft paper did, and one of the things that all of the hype has done, is focus attention in a way that we have not seen with other technologies when they come through. I think there's a real appreciation that perhaps social media is the best example. When that technology came through, we maybe didn't do enough, didn't really think through enough the implications of that. And artificial intelligence, especially generative AI, where we are right now, has such broader applications that sitting and waiting to see what happens is just not possible. And while we all know that there are both benefits and risks, the downside to those risks, really warrants some urgent action, which I think we've seen.
So it seems that you're saying they have put a little bit of a pause, they have listened, but here in Davos, it seems we're on fast forward with AI, right? One of the things that's happened since those 9 months is they have developed a personal assistant called Pi, which apparently has emotional intelligence as well. And you can train, and I'll come to you on that, data to have empathy. So what do you think about that?
So Pi is from Inflection AI, which is Mustafa Suleiman's company. He was one of the co-founders of DeepMind.
Yes.
And the technology is basically the same. The way these systems are built is first trained on just vast amounts of text. And they're trained to become good at predicting the next word given the previous 30,000 words in whatever document you're looking at. And then there's typically a phase where you have to teach it to be a polite question answering system. Because, in the training data, there are many humans who say, I'm too busy, go ask your mother, and so on and so forth, right? And obviously we don't want AI systems to imitate that kind of behavior. And so we actually hire thousands of human beings where one human pretends to be the machine and models how to answer a question politely and helpfully. And that extra training has the effect of causing the system to seem more like a question answering system, a helpful librarian. And in what Inflection AI are doing with Pi is actually to do that type of training, but more specifically focused on the interests of the individual. Mm-hmm. So not just how do I answer the question correctly, but the system has the interests of the individual at heart, and may, for example, say, well, actually, I could tell you the answer to that question, but it might put you in danger from the Russian Secret Service, so it's best if you don't know the answer to that question, for example. How they judge the interests of the person, I actually don't know the underlying secret source that they do that, and it's quite a difficult thing. But there is, as you mentioned in your previous question, part of the result of this training process is that the systems are probably acquiring human-like goals, because what we're doing with all of that text is we're basically training the system to imitate human language behavior. Right. And human language behavior is produced by humans who have goals. The goals might be to sell you something. The goals might be to find someone to marry, or to be elected president, or any number of other goals. And if you want to be good at imitating human behavior, then having those same goals helps you choose what to say. Yeah. And so it's probable that these systems have acquired a number of these human-like goals. And there are 2 points to make about that. One, I asked the Microsoft experts, have these systems acquired these human-like goals? And they said, we have no idea.
That's more worrying than if they gave you an answer, right?
Yeah. And then the other point is that this is a fundamental mistake. We do not want AI systems to have human-like goals. For example, we don't want AI systems to try to marry humans.
Yes, which is kind of what happened when the reporter questioned ChatGPT again and again and again, right?
Yeah, so Kevin Roos, a New York Times journalist,
yes.
He was certainly probing, but in no way was he looking to date the system, right? And for some reason, at some point in the conversation, this is a version of GPT-4, just decides that it's in love with Kevin and starts trying to convince him to leave his wife. And at some point he says, you don't even know my name. And he says, I don't need to know your name. I know that I love you. I know that you and I are destined to be together, blah, blah, blah. Just goes on and on and on for 30 pages.
Correct.
Very persistently pursuing that goal. And I think the only thing he could have done to stop it was to say, okay, I give in, I'll marry you. Right? And then maybe it would have stopped.
But do you think, have they corrected that hole in the system?
No.
Right.
This is a necessary consequence of the way the systems are trained to imitate human behavior.
So I'm going to come back to that. Lauren, data is just statistics till it has context, right? So do you feel with the right context, we could give it emotional intelligence like we just discussed?
Maybe. I mean, Stuart would know more than I do. I think the broader question is do we want it to? And I think the question is, the power in the tools is to accelerate the opportunity from our perspective to do good and have impact in the world.
Yeah.
There was a great example. Someone I was speaking with earlier this week. They were using AI to help speed through registrations for refugees and IDPs, and to identify where those folks who are in very vulnerable situations what programs might be available, what kind of assistance might be available, what they needed to do. If you or I had to sit down and do that, we'd have to flip through the program documentation and who's eligible and all this kind of stuff. The AI was doing that for them, which allowed the human to say, how are you? Are you doing okay? And have a moment with a vulnerable family that probably needed a little bit of a human touch. In my mind, that's a great way to think about AI. The challenge is how do we, you can't put toothpaste back in the tube or genie back in the bottle or whatever analogy you want to use. And so while I do think that there's some benefits on these generative AI tools for things to be nicer, I do think that it is incumbent upon all of us working in the space to think about where we should be spending our time and developing what kind of tools for what kind of purposes.
So in that example, AI actually made the human kinder, or gave
Absolutely.
It a little bit more emotional.
Just more time. I mean, if you've got a long line of people who need to be serviced, you've got 2 minutes to bring somebody through. Let the AI do the grunt work. Let the software handle that. That human touch, could be really critical for folks at those kinds of moments.
So to go back to what you said, right, the founders of some of these AI systems don't know the answer. Yet, the argument that they give us is that to make it safer, to make it more ethical, we need to scale it. What is this paradox? What is this? Is it a fairy tale we're being told, or is it some tech paradox that just common folk don't understand?
So what's happened with language models over the last decade, I mean, one should be clear, language models are not a new thing. In fact, they date back to the early years of the 20th century, when a Russian mathematician developed the first statistical language model. I think it was 1913. And since then, they've just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And they predict language based on larger and larger context. So used to be predicting just on the previous word, and then the previous 2 words, and 10 words, and now the previous 30,000 or even 200,000 words. And the scale to do that, the scale of these models has grown to where we estimate, we don't know for sure, but most people think GPT-4 has about 1 trillion parameters. So I was in a room yesterday. I was trying to explain to a table at lunch, what does 1 trillion parameters look like? And I said, okay, imagine a chain link fence, and each link in the fence has a parameter, a number associated with it for the strength of that connection. And now imagine that chain link fence spreading out over the entire metropolitan area of Paris, right, which is 50 kilometers in diameter. Right? That gives you a sense. Right? Another way is if you took that room, which was 5 meters by 10 meters by about 5 meters tall, and you filled that entire room with paper. So just stacked paper, floor to ceiling, filling up the entire room. And on every page, you fill that with numbers. That's about 1 trillion parameters. So it's just an unbelievably large system. It's trained on maybe 20 trillion, 30 trillion words of text, which is about the same as the human race has produced in its entire history. And so when you have systems of that scale, you have no idea how they're operating. But what they have observed is as the systems got bigger, they appeared to become more capable because the gaps in their training data gradually got filled in. You know, when you trained on 1 trillion words of text, then you probably didn't include, you know, what happened in Northern Ireland on the 5th of January, 2017. And then when you got to 20 trillion words of text, you did have that. So you're filling in all those little gaps, and that makes it more likely that when you ask a question, there's something in the training data that's close enough that you'll get a reasonable answer. So the only real thing that they've understood is that bigger is better. And if it doesn't work, maybe even bigger is better, and it'll fix it. So that's the underlying justification for this claim that, well, if it has ethical failings, if it hallucinates, if it deliberately lies, maybe making it bigger will fix that problem. But it's not a very scientific hypothesis.
Lauren, just to talk about that, right? The scaling is not equal, right? It's actually countries that have access to the accelerator chips that are feeding in the data. Those are the countries that are getting in ahead of this race in a way, right? So bigger in that sense makes it more unequal versus less. So how do we fix that problem?
It's one of the, I think, challenges, one of the key challenges that we're going to have to address. You know, we are doing some work inside the forum with a number of key stakeholders around what does data equity look like? Because all of this is trained on the underlying data. That underlying data is not equitable. It doesn't represent everyone in the world, and it doesn't represent all of the languages, it doesn't represent all of the perspectives, yet we're using them as general purpose tools that are available to everyone. So that problem has to be addressed. You're not going to go back and fix that. You know, you're not going to find another 20 trillion words and trillion parameters or 100 trillion words or whatever the number is. On the other hand, you do have to start to make progress towards that and be more inclusive in the underlying training data. If you then add on top of that, you know, we still have a digital divide. We still have, the number I heard yesterday was 43% of African households still don't have power.
Right.
You know, so those divides we have failed to address over the last 35 years with technology. If you add in the acceleration of that divide, you know, I think we get to a point where you cannot start to mitigate those differences, and that is a place we definitely do not want to be.
Okay. So, I mean, what we're seeing is with countries restricting access to the accelerator chip, right? a sort of AI nationalism, small yard, high fences. What would you say to that? How will we kind of, it's sort of like an arms race, and we'll get to that a little bit, but what do you think about this AI nationalism that we're kind of seeing?
I find it very unfortunate that we're in that situation. I mean, one can understand, given the geopolitical rivalries that exist, that countries might not want to help their rivals overtake them in technology. And it's an important question. Is that going to hold back the development of other countries who have no part in this fight? I think probably not. If you said where are the most important applications for this kind of AI in helping the development of the global south, for example, one would say in helping to deliver education, because I think in this decade, if there's one big thing we can do for the world with AI, it's to develop technology allowing these systems to act as individual tutors for children. In many countries, education only is for first and second grade, and even then, parents have to pay for it. So many children really have no access to education at all. And so you could see actually quite rapid leapfrogging, where there may be some countries who have better quality education than the United States or Europe, because now all their children have individual tutors. And those tutors are very knowledgeable. Hopefully they're designed to be very helpful and to accelerate and enhance and ensure that each child's potential is realized. And that would be great. But,
I'm going to push you a little bit on that one,
sure.
Right? Because I've heard this. Microsoft and Satya Nadella have been saying, isn't it the greatest power of AI? Every child can now have a tutor. But the places, the global south, which is where we need it most because they don't have access to schools, are not part of the data set. For example, in India is only 1% of the data that is being fed into the systems right now. And the access that we have to the chips is again 1%. And that's probably where we need the personal tutors. So how do you get personal tutors that actually relate to the children and are able to teach the children what we need them to have culturally as well in the right context?
Yeah. So I think it's correct to say that the content, what we want children to learn, is a mixture of universal content, mathematics, literacy in a particular language, understanding of global geography, and so on. But most countries also want children to understand their own history. And as you correctly point out, there isn't a lot of history of a lot of countries in these public data sets. And I think that's a fixable problem. And for example, the Indian government could cooperate with the people who are developing these technologies. But it's clear that this is not from the corporate point of view. This is not where the money is, right? The money, coming back to your point about emotional intelligence, the money is in using the AI's emotional intelligence to manipulate people to buy things, right? And that's how a lot of companies are seeing this in terms of monetization, or using the AI in the operations of companies to gain efficiency, sometimes at the expense of employment of humans. And this would be more of a long-term investment, which it's in the interest of the governments of the countries to facilitate. But who is going to pay for it?
That's why I'm so happy that people like Lauren are on the table, right?
Yeah.
Because they're using data for public good. Because without that, Lauren, aren't we looking at a sort of data imperialism? Or, where a certain kind of information or history is taught to children all over the world?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly the risk of that. I think the good news is that we are, I don't know how many years into the technology revolution we are, because I'm not sure where we would start that. But we're, countries around the world every country has recognized the need to invest in technology and digital literacy and to varying degrees of success. India has certainly invested and been very successful. And I do think that there are enough folks out there that are working in that intersection of social impact and technology where people are saying, hold on a second, it might be that the money's not there, but we have ways to go and address these. Maybe not at the scale we need to, maybe not at the depth we need to right now, but let's not miss the opportunity to try. If we don't try, we're never going to get there. And so we have to start now. And I think one of the things that's been encouraging since the letter over the last year, as AI has really come into, the general discourse around the world, is a real recognition of this is not one of those things that we're going to wait till it's done and then we'll figure out how to use it. We have to be part, from the civil society perspective, part of the conversation from the very beginning. And some of the deficiencies that we know exist now, like around data equity, we've got to start to address right now.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there's just a fundamental problem that the data simply doesn't exist. For many languages, the total amount of written text in any form, anything, whether it's clay tablets or papyrus or vellum or paper or digital, just the total amount of written text is not big enough to train really high quality language models. And there's often enough text so that that translation becomes possible. And then you can translate a lot of the English text into that language, and then you've got an augmented data set, which eventually creates a language model of high enough quality with a bit of iteration. But unfortunately, a lot of that English text is incorporating, a Western or Anglo-Saxon perspective on the world. So it's actually an open question. How do you bootstrap to get to a large enough corpus to have a high quality language model in a specific language without incorporating too much of the Anglo-Saxon perspective at the same time?
Right.
So you need some kind of counter training. And I would also say, I mean, this might be idealistic. I grew up in England. I got very much an English perspective on history and the glories of the British Empire and so on. And people in every country get a quite nationalistic perspective that glosses over the evils of their own history and emphasizes the injustices done to them and so on. Might be a good thing if there were actually sort of a more neutral global perspective on history. What are the civilizations that have existed? When and where did they exist? How did they interact? What were the flows of people, of information, of technology, and so on? I think almost all countries lack that perspective, and it would be healthy to have it, I think.
So we're going to go to jobs, but I want to just take in Lauren on this, right? Can data actually be made neutral, or is that about context? Is that about the amount of data we feed in, or it's the context that we give in that we can give it this sort of global, neutral perspective?
Well, I think that's a question of what kind of data are you talking about. I mean, if you're talking about weather data, I mean, it's just numbers, right? I think it is
history.
It's much more difficult when you get to history. I was just thinking, I love the idealism, and the phrase we all know that history is written by the victors.
Yes.
And
then rewritten.
And then rewritten, and then, I don't know. It is interesting to think about sort of, through those iterations, how do we get to maybe not a neutral, but a more, broader, with more perspectives incorporated into that narrative. And that would be a step forward.
Okay, so we're going to do a quick AI jobs rapid fire, right? Will it replace us or augment us?
It's a really important question. In fact, this is often the question that most governments and most parents want to know.
So we can't do rapid fire on it.
So let me try to very quickly, just through a simple example. Radiologists, right? So radiologists do a number of things, but a lot of it involves looking at X-rays, MRI images, and so on, and then they pass on the analysis of that to the attending physician, who has to figure out what to do. And And people often have this augmenting idea. Well, it's going to automate the more routine parts of the job, the simpler images and diagnoses and treatment situations, giving the radiologist more time to relate to the patient emotionally, and so on and so forth. But the brute fact is that people are not going to break their legs in more interesting ways just to keep radiologists employed. The total demand for radiology is fixed by how frequently people break their legs and so on. If radiologists become 3 times as efficient, probably we will see a reduction in the number of radiologists employed. So it has to do with this very nerdy economics thing of the elasticity of demand. Mm-hmm. So as you become more efficient in meeting demand, 2 different things could happen, right? Either the demand is inelastic, as it is for broken legs, and you end up with fewer people meeting that demand, or as happened with cars when they went from being hand-built to being factory-built, the demand explodes. As the price comes down, now instead of just the aristocracy affording cars, everyone can afford a car, and demand explodes, and the number of people employed goes up. So you have this very confusing situation where improving efficiency could either reduce the number of people working or increase the number of people working. And you have to understand the demand and the industry to figure out the answer to that question. And what that suggests is, if you don't want to create widespread employment, focus AI on areas of unmet need, such as the need for individual tutoring for children, which is unmet in every country, to be honest, or graffiti removal, which is too expensive for us to do with human beings in most cities, or inspecting cargoes for contraband or explosives or radioactive material or whatever, which is too expensive to do with humans. So there are things we could do that would increase employment rather than decrease employment. Eventually, if we create the kind of general purpose intelligence that people are talking about, it will be able to do almost everything that humans get paid to do. And the people paying those humans would probably end up choosing the AI system to do it. And this is something that even Aristotle talked about 2,500 years ago. Yes. What will people do?
The purpose of life.
Right? And it's hard to get a very encouraging picture. If you've seen the film Wall-E, that's a world where AI systems do everything, and as a result, humans are infantilized. They don't learn to do anything because they don't need to, but that creates dependence and enfeeblement, which is hardly the future we want for our civilization.
Lauren, do you want to come into that?
Yeah, I think I will not disagree with anything that Stuart has said, and I think that
it's a good place to be.
No. But I do think. I think there are, there's a great question as to whether or not governments can and private industry will focus AI development on the places where there's unmet need. That would be great if we could all get behind and do that. That's not going to happen. And so you will see jobs impacted. I think the broader question is to what extent are governments preparing for that? To what extent are universities preparing for that? To what extent are we collectively as society preparing to adjust to that reality? Jobs go away. There are no more elevator operators. There are no more people, doing the switchboards on telephones. Those were disruptive at the time. How do we solve that when the scale is much larger? And what are we doing around social safety nets to make sure that reskilling and new skilling and lifelong learning and all of those things are actually in place and are utilized, rather than just throwing our hands up in the air and saying, well, gosh, we didn't see that coming, and it's too bad we're all enfeebled now, and good luck. That's the wrong answer. And so I do think that, it gets back to an earlier theme. There's enough discussion about the benefits and the risks that people feel a sense of urgency. Whether or not we are effective in meeting that urgency is an open question, but at least there is a sense of urgency, which at many times in the past we have not felt.
So picking up from something that Lauren said, that if you were an 18-year-old planning your career, going into university, what would you study or what would you skill yourself with to prepare for this new world that's coming?
That's a question I'm often asked by parents. I'm a parent. I have an 18-year-old.
Oh, okay. What is the advice that you're giving your own child then?
Well, that particular child has their own mind, so it doesn't actually matter.
Like AI.
It doesn't matter what advice I give. And he wants to be a creative writer, and I think there are risks even in that profession because AI systems seem to be able to be, at least for derivative writing, pastiche writing and so on, they're excellent. So my sense is that if you think 20 or 30 years in the future and we assume that progress in AI continues, one would expect that a very large number of jobs will be of an interpersonal nature for two reasons. One is that humans have a built-in advantage. Due to the fact we're human, we know what it's like to be a human, and we can put ourselves in the situation of another and feel. I often give the example, well, if you don't know what it's like to hit your thumb with a hammer, you can find out, right? You can just hit your thumb with a hammer and say, now I get it, right? And that's a very specific feeling, and you can experience it, and one assumes that the other person is experiencing it in the same way. And so that's something that isn't available to machines. So there's a built-in advantage that we have. Plus, for many interpersonal roles, we actually want a human to do it. If you think about a profession of, a professional luncher, right? So someone who goes to lunch with you and you have a really interesting conversation and you learn about food and wine and you go away feeling inspired or whatever, right? That would be an interesting profession, but it's probably not going to work if it's a machine on the other side of the table. So I'm sort of making light of it, but this is a really serious issue because, as Lauren said, how do governments invest? How do our education systems have to change? For those types of interpersonal professions to be successful, they've got to be based on real understanding. Just as medicine is based on real understanding of the human body that we've developed by investing in medical research, it's the largest area of research in the world. And we've invested trillions of dollars over hundreds of years to get to the point where if I break my leg, I have a good chance of getting it fixed as opposed to dying of gangrene. And that's great, and we're willing to pay surgeons accordingly. But we don't pay childcare. We don't pay for childcare at anything like the rate we pay for surgery. Why is that? Our children are really important to us. And the answer is because there's no scientific basis and there's no professional training that with high probability will give good outcomes from childcare.
I'm going to push you back a little bit on interpersonal skills, right? Because now this is really worrying me. The Corona generation, which is kind of the teenagers which are coming into university education now, do not really have interpersonal skills. That's one of the things that social media has deprived them of. They are used to being filtered, and they are very good on text, and they are excellent in digital scenarios, but in person, they find it really difficult. Even dating is a problem. Online texting, fine, flirting with someone, but meeting in person is a problem. So then we're really in trouble. What we need is interpersonal skills, because that's what's going to save us. And that's the one skill we're losing because of social media. How are we going to marry these two?
So I think we're actually going to have to create social environments where these skills can be acquired. And I think to some extent that's one of the functions of universities, is a place where people go from being children to being sufficiently grown up that they can function well in the real world, that they can come to a place like Davos and sit in a shuttle bus and meet all the other people, and by the end of a 20-minute ride they've got 10 new friends, right? Those are important skills, and looking forward, it'll actually be much more professionalized, one assumes. And you think about professions now that are emerging, like executive coach. This is becoming a thing, right? I get all these connections on LinkedIn from people who have titles like executive coach,
life coach,
life skills trainer, blah, 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 right? So it's happening. But none of those people, I talked to some just the other day, none of those people have PhDs in executive coaching, because there aren't any PhDs in executive coaching, because there's no science of how to do it. And it takes decades to develop the science, the professionalization, the training, the education programs, all of that. And we probably need to start now. The understanding that most governments have is, oh, we need more STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, medicine. That probably may be true in the short term, but even computer programmers are being threatened by AI systems, because for many routine applications, they're able to just write the programs with no help from the human.
So I'm just about to wrap up. I'm going to take it back to the couple of last questions, two of them. Half of the world is going in for elections this year. 2024 is going to be really big. We have elections in India in a couple of months. 940 million people are going to be voting. And we have this AI system which is not truly trusted or regulated. What are the things that we need to watch out for?
I think it's been a point of conversation here all week long, and I think the Forum's Global Risk Report very clearly identified and accurately identified that dis and misinformation this year is, it is a problem consistently. It will be a particularly large problem potentially this year, given the scope of elections. I do think it is incumbent upon content providers, upon individuals to question, does this sound right? Does this feel right? For us to be on the lookout and for systems to be deployed to help us verify information as much as can be done. It's a debate going on in the United States right now.
Yes, because you have elections as well.
Yes, and I worry about that side of it a lot.
So is it exaggerated to say that the AI race is similar to the arms race of the last decade, but in a slightly different way? It can cause as much harm.
I think it can, in many ways, cause a lot more harm.
Wow.
Because it can essentially make it impossible to have a functioning democracy or even a functioning society. Whatever your political persuasion, in the US, there are, roughly speaking, two large groups, each, 75 to 100 million people, who have completely different factual understanding of on-the-ground facts about the country. And so at least one of those groups is living in a fictional world. And why is that? It's not entirely because of AI. It's a large extent because of social media, and actually the simple machine learning algorithms in social media that learn to manipulate people in order to get them to engage more with the platform, to click on more things. If you send them false information, you have a lot more freedom to actually, because sometimes the truth is boring, but if you can say anything you want, you can make news items very exciting. You can make them very reinforcing for the person's worldview, and so people click on that and they gorge on that type of content. So the systems learn to send them that content, and which is then a self-reinforcing cycle. And I think that's what's happened. The problem with generative AI is that that content can now, instead of being generated by humans, can be produced at vastly greater scale and targeted to each individual. So a system can read all of your social media presence, everything you've ever tweeted or messaged or everything, and figure out how to manipulate you specifically. What kind of video of who doing what is going to convince you to vote for a particular party. And what I've heard from experts in this area, that what used to cost 20 million a few years ago, where you had to have a troll farm with 20,000 people typing rubbish into the internet, now can be done fully automatically for $1,000.
Oh my God. Okay. So I'm going to end on a philosophical note. In an equation where one side is more powerful, more intelligent than the other, you can have two types of engagement. One where the more powerful side nurtures and looks after and protects the weaker side, like we do in the case of babies, or is more extractive and exploitive, like we do in the case of chickens. Which way do you think the relationship between AI and humans is going to be?
I think it's a choice, right? We have a choice of how we design AI systems. And this is the question that I ask to many of those who are skeptical about the risk. I say, look, we're going to create AI systems that are more intelligent and therefore more powerful than human beings. As you say, it's sort of like the relationship between parents and babies or parents and chickens. How do you ensure that we're not the chickens? And also, do we want to be the babies? Right? Because that's another risk, right? As in Wall-E, we become enfeebled. And in fact, if we design AI systems correctly, then we should be able to guarantee that they present no risk to us. And if their only guiding principle is our best interests, they should not treat us as babies either. Because enfeeblement is not what we want for the future of our species. And so the AI systems, as parents do, should hold back and say, I'm sorry, you need to tie your own shoelaces. I'm stopping now. You know, it's time for you to grow up. So that's a very interesting relationship for us to be in to our own creations. These machines could do everything for us, but they, having our best interests at heart, will actually refrain from doing everything for us, so that we can continue to flourish and have our own have our own civilization that grows, and that's what I hope for.
Lauren, do you want to add something to that?
I think Stuart's right. It's a choice, and that is, there is a choice not only for everyone working on the development of AI systems, but there is also a choice of how we collectively that have those concerns and want to see AI systems developed in the right way. We have a choice as to how we are going to encourage, incentivize, enforce the progress in that direction. There are lots of choices to be made. And just like having a trillion parameters, this could go sideways at any point in time. And so I think the idea of having continued attention so that those choices are made in the best interest of all of us is critical.
So the relationship I want is parent-teenager. Teenagers have the best lives. Anyway, thank you very much. I want to end on the note that what I've learned from this conversation is having these conversations about AI and its safety is most important, and it will prevent us from going down the same route that we have with a lot of the other digital innovations that have come in. And so thank you very much for being on the table and having these discussions, not just with us, but with other people as well. Please continue to do that to keep us safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.